Okay, so this is the Bible study for Amos chapter 6, and we're continuing on with our study of Amos, which has been kind of a tough study, I think, kind of a sort of piercing study, but it's been good for us. The text says, "Woe to you who are complacent in Zion, and to you who feel secure in Mount Samaria, you notable men of the foremost nation, to whom the people of Israel come. Go to Calneh and look at it. Go from there to Great Hamath, and then go down to Gath in Philistia. Are they better off than your two kingdoms? Is their land larger than yours? You put off the day of disaster and bring near a reign of terror. You lie on beds adorned with ivory and lounge on your couches. You dine on choice lambs and fattened calves. You strum away on your harps like David and improvise on musical instruments. You drink wine by the bowlful and use the finest lotions. But you do not grieve over the ruin of Joseph. Therefore, you will be among the first to go into exile. Your feasting and lounging will end. The sovereign Lord has sworn by himself. The Lord God Almighty declares, I abhor the pride of Jacob and detest his fortresses. I will deliver up the city and everything in it. If 10 people are left in one house, they too will die. And if the relative who comes to carry the bodies out of the house to burn them, ask anyone who might be hiding there, is anyone else with you? And he says, no, then he will go on to say, hush, we must not mention the name of the Lord. For the Lord has given the command, and he will smash the great house into pieces and the small house into bits. Do horses run on rocky crags? Does one plow the sea with oxen? But you have turned justice into poison and the fruit of righteousness into bitterness. You who rejoice in the conquest of Lo-debar and say, did we not take Carnaim by our own strength? For the Lord God Almighty declares, I will stir up a nation against you, Israel, that will oppose you all the way from Lebo Hamath to the valley of Arabah. All right, that's another rough text. So remember that you can download PDF copies of this Bible study so that you can follow along with us at www.abqnaz.org/alive. And so you can follow along as we ask questions about this text and understand what it's trying to tell us. Number one in our Bible study says, what is God correcting Israel for now? According to 6:1, I put a little sarcasm in there, a little bit of uh, underlying frustration about God continuing to bring up these new charges against us, and how frustrating that must have been for somebody who thought they were doing pretty good, and how frustrating that may be for us if we thought we were doing pretty good. A says the terrible sin and idol worship, which sort of has definitely been in this um, book, has definitely been a part of the correction, but that's not specifically what he's addressing now. B, he says, woe to you who are complacent. C, he says, woe to you who feel secure. So specifically, he's not, although he does bring up sort of the injustice that was present in Israel because of their greed, um, at the end of this chapter, he's not really addressing specifically um, all that injustice in this beginning part, at least. He's not addressing the idol worship. Instead, he's addressing their complacency and their sort of self-security. It's not wrong to feel secure, but that security should be in God and not in our own strength. And clearly Israel had come to the point where they felt good about their own strength, a strength, by the way, that God reminds them he provided, he gave to them. And yet they're really starting to feel cocky as if it came from them. So specifically, he's addressing complacency and feelings of self-security in this text. And so that's what we're going to talk about. Number two says, what does God mean when he addresses complacency and feelings of security? Uh, I don't um, I probably should say no. I don't know. It doesn't sound like a big deal, or as big a deal as what we talked about before. So I'm just going to skip over that part. Sometimes I think we think, oh, let's focus on the idol worship. Let's focus on the other really bad things they did, because this doesn't sound that bad, and also this sounds more like I wasn't really doing any idol worship, but this sounds like it could apply to me more, and I don't want to talk about that, because it sounds like he is just as upset over this as he was over those other things that we still consider terrible things. But this we don't really seem to consider terrible things, which is why we've perhaps allowed it to remain in our lives, or remain in our churches, and remain um, as part of our faith and our lives that we consider lives of faith. And like, okay, we've allowed certain things to remain because we didn't think they were that big a deal. We got rid of the other things that we knew were bad, but this isn't that big a deal, right? Well, obviously we're going to um, argue that God felt like this was a big deal, and he addresses this specifically. Be complacent means showing smug or uncritical satisfaction with oneself or one's achievements. So I'll just say this: this is not, an analysis of the Greek word. This is just a definition easily found by Googling the word complacency or finding a dictionary. And the translators have used this word complacent, and this is what that English word means: showing smug, and smug sounds bad, or uncritical. We don't maybe know what that means. Satisfaction with oneself or one's achievements. Now, satisfaction with oneself or one's achievements doesn't sound bad. Why do they got to put those, really negative adjectives in there to make it sound bad? C, essentially, it's arrogance. Feeling good about where you are without assessing whether you are actually in a good place. That's what uncritical means. So specifically, he says uncritical. In other words, sort of the word critical is thrown around in all different contexts and sort of meanings. But to be critical is not necessarily a negative thing. It is to analyze or to critique, to look at something. So, if I was a movie critic, I would probably analyze the plot line of a movie more than the average movie goer. I might analyze um, the character development. I might analyze. I'm going to look deeper into that movie than the average person. And sometimes we say, well, the average person just goes to a movie for fun, so why do we need all that? But I watch. Some of you probably know, if you know me, that I've gotten into, since COVID, board games, and I have a wall of board games, and not that I need to defend myself, but my board games cost less than most kinds of entertainment that we spend money on, and they give me a chance to spend time interacting with my family, unlike watching a TV show or a movie where you're not interacting at all. You're all staring at the same screen. And so they also allow me to stretch my brain. And so we've gotten into this, and I watch YouTube videos that critique um, the the games before I buy them, to find out, is this the kind of game I would like? Is this kind? And some of the best games, that some of the critiques that they level against them are like, wow, I never thought about that, or I never thought that that would be a problem, or I never stopped to consider whether that mattered to me as much as they're considering it. Uh, so to be uncritical is not to look at and analyze uh, something. Now you might say, well, with entertainment, with movies or board games or whatever, what does it really matter if we critique it? If you have fun, you have fun. Well, that's probably true. Um, but with my life, I think it matters quite a bit more. Um, if I'm making decisions without and sort of shaping my life without considering whether this is what I really want my life to look like, and even more importantly, God really wants my life to look like. Which honestly, I as I grow in my spiritual walk, I try to make those two the same things. I want to know what God really wants my life to look like, because I feel I'll be most fulfilled if my life looks like what He wants it to look like. And so when I look at my life and how I respond in situations, I am more critical of myself than I find most people being of themselves. We're all really good at being critical of others, but we're not all really good at looking at ourselves and looking at that through God's light, which is why I love that verse, search me, O God, and see if there be any wicked way in me. So that's a reflective spirit. It's hard to be complacent if you're reflective like that and allowing God to critique your life. And so, if you are uncritical of your life, you allow things to happen in there that ultimately don't put you where you want to be. When when one of our staff members years and years ago went on sabbatical, they went to other churches and just watched and listened. I'm sure they wanted to grow spiritually as well, but one of the things they did was sort of become secret shoppers of these other churches and just go in and look at what happened in the church when somebody got up and didn't identify themselves or introduce themselves. um, they didn't know who they were because they were a first time visitor to the church. They thought, man, wow, I don't know who that is, and they're talking to me like I should know who that is, and I feel really left out of what's going on here. When people say from the stage, you know me, and you're a visitor and you walk in and you say, I don't know you. So now I feel really left out because you've said that to me. And I feel like I must be the only one that doesn't know you that's here, or else you wouldn't have said that. And so now I feel like I've been singled out. And so they did that secret shopping, not just to be critical, and not really, not at all to be critical of those other churches, but to watch what other churches did so that they could see the things that maybe we also do that could be done better, that make visitors to our church feel less welcome. And so I don't think you have to visit other churches in order to be have a critical eye to our church. In fact, I very much try to not let things blend in, although certainly I am very excited about the thought to get our roof repaired, which we're working on, because I can't stand seeing tubs sitting around the central sanctuary, and particularly in the foyer where that's the first thing any visitor sees. And I understand the challenge that when we put them away for service, which I've done before, sometimes they don't get set back out, and then we have a rain, and so then I feel like, oh, maybe we should leave them out. But then I just feel like that's a terrible look for somebody that walks into our church. Now, maybe if we want them to think we're an impoverished church, and we are, and maybe they'll see the need and give to that need. I don't know. Then maybe that's all right to put that foot forward. But I just don't always think it's the best thing for people to see. Now, so what I've been doing here is talking about what it looks like to critique, to be able to critique ourselves. As pastor, I want to critique our church. and be critical of it, not in a negative way, not in a mean way, but if I do that of our own church, then I'm doing that with a heart and a desire to improve it. If we as individuals do that for our own lives, then we do that with hopefully a heart and a desire to improve it. If we are regularly doing that and seeking God's guidance, He does that with a desire to improve us. If we choose not to be critical, then we are saying we're okay where we're at, and that is arrogant because it's saying I'm happy here. I'm gonna stay. I'm gonna just stop here. And that comes with sort of the assumption that I'm good enough, and that's arrogant. So essentially, being complacent is arrogance because we think where we're at is good enough, and there's no need for analysis or critique. And I have yet to meet somebody where that's actually true, that there's no need for analysis or critique. But rather, I think all of us, if we listen to God, He would have areas where we need to grow. D says it means you've stopped growing, that you've stopped looking for things in your life that could still be improved, that you've settled for how far you've come and stopped thinking about where God might want to take you. The fact that you are uncritical means you've probably stopped listening to what God might have to say about where He wants to take you. Because if you were listening to Him, you would be more critical of yourself. You would hear the things that need improved in your life. So if you think you're fine, then chances are you've stopped listening to God because God is about your growth. And when we come into the presence of God, even the most faithful messengers of God were broken in the presence of God. When we come into His presence, we see the comparison between ourselves and Him and realize how far we have to go. That's the amazing thing about the presence of God. Go back and read Isaiah chapter 6 and God's call for Isaiah, and you'll see what happens when we come into the presence of God, and our natural response to how broken, how far we are below Him, and what would need to change for us to become more like Him. Which we were created in His image, so that was the plan, that was the purpose. And the fall and our brokenness have made us have marred the image of God in our life, and God is through Christ trying to recreate the image of God in our lives. And if we are still short of the image of God, then He still has growth for us. And if you don't think He has growth for us, what you're saying is you're no longer short of the image of God. You see how arrogant that sounds. Number three, what are the understood answers to the questions in verse 2? So he tells them to go look at the other nations, go to a place where you can look at them. Of course, Israel thought they were better than those kingdoms. He knew that the answer would be yes. So he asked the question, are they better off than your two kingdoms? Not the answer to that question. The answer to that question would be no, they're not better off. Is their land larger than yours? No. But the question really is, are you better than everybody? And that's why I wrote because in the commentary it reframes the question saying, are you better than these nations? And he knew the answer for them would be yes, we're better. They're not better than us, they're not larger than us, they don't have more territory than us, we're better. So the answer to that question, not the questions in verse 2, is yes, we're better. B, well, I think based on verse 7 that he was about to bring down the hammer. The cities that they felt superior to would last longer than them. They would be the first, Israel and Judah, would be the first to go into exile. Maybe not better like they thought. So verse 7 says, therefore you will be among the first to go into exile. Your feasting and lounging will end. So he's like, go look at them. And so he's identifying the arrogance. They felt like they were good because they were better than the people around them. And that's where complacency comes from. When we stop getting into the presence of God, when we get into the presence of God, we recognize how far we have to go. When we don't get into the presence of God and we compare ourselves with the people around us, that's when we get arrogant and we think, no, we're better. We're fine. We don't have to grow. We're better than them. And that's what happens in our Christian walk as well. Well, I don't do that like them, and I don't do that like them, and so I'm better. It's amazing in the training creating a culture of calling that we did recently. The concept of spiritual velocity was brought up, which I just loved that concept, because the concept was that's one of the things we look at when we're choosing leaders. So sometimes there's people in our church that can't figure out why they're not being chosen for leadership. And the answer is because they're stalled out in their faith. They haven't grown in months or years. I haven't seen growth in them. I haven't seen even a desire to grow. They're on their phones during worship and during the preaching and teaching. They're not coming to church at times when they really should be there to be growing. So that the fact that they come on Sunday sometimes but don't come on a different time, or don't come to Bible study or whatever, is sort of evidence that they feel like they don't need that in their growth sometimes. I'm not saying 100% by any means, but I think sometimes that's just one of the data points that I'm looking at, and I'm like, this person is not focused on growth. They seem to have stalled out and decided that they're better than a lot of these new people coming in. These new people coming, man, they're just off drugs. They're not off drugs. They're still using curse words. They're still smoking. They're still, and I'm better than that. And so I'm right with God. I'm in the right place. Yet these people that are still smoking, or not, or just off drugs, are day by day handing things over to God and hearing God's voice and growing and changing and growing to the point that their trajectory of growth. See, this person that's been in the church forever is not what I would call mature, but they're good enough in their own mind, and their trajectory of growth is like this. And this other person may be down here below. Let's see if I can get the direction right. I feel like I'm doing a little dance. Your trajectory's here, and this other person may be down below, but their trajectory is like gonna pass you up. This is their spiritual velocity. Is they're growing like crazy. And because every day they're hearing the voice of God, they know there's things that are still wrong in their life. They're listening to God, they're handing them over to God, and their spiritual velocity is fast. They are growing, and they are going, and we're like, well, we're going to put them in a position of leadership. We're going to put them in, they're going to start teaching a Bible study. And people are like, I've been here a long time. Why aren't I'm more mature than them? Why aren't I teaching a Bible study? Well, because you've stalled out. I don't think you're growing. I think in a matter of weeks, months, maybe weeks, they're going to pass you up in maturity if they continue to grow because they're listening to God. And so that's what we're talking about here. So Israel was that complacent one. Israel was the one that thought that they were fine. And there were other nations around them they were comparing themselves to, and they thought they were better. But God's saying, you just watch. You're going to go to exile, and they're going to still be here. And I think it's worth examining our hearts and our lives. By the way, there are people that have been in the church a long time that are still growing leaps and bounds because they're still listening to God. And so this isn't about how long you've been in the church. It's really about how well you're listening to God. Um, and he makes it really clear what the deal is here. What does God say in 6:8? So this is a sort of new section, but it's continuing on about Israel. A, well, of course, there is chosen people. That's not what it says. B, he abhors their pride and detests their fortresses. So these things that have become symbols of how great they are, that he, by the way, allowed them to get or empowered them to get. They would not have been able to build these fortresses without him, but they have become symbols of their own pride, and he hates it. He detests it. He abhors it. See, the God who is supposed to be available for their protection is instead delivering up the city. He says, I deliver up the city and everything in it. Delivering up the city and everything in it. There is nothing there worth protecting. So this is a big deal. He says, I was the one that helped them build those fortresses, but now they've relied on those and think that they're good enough, and they started to think they built it. And so now I was supposed to be their protection, but they're not relying on me for protection anymore. They're relying on these fortresses that I helped them build. So now I'm going to deliver them up at the city and everything in it, and they'll see that their fortresses weren't enough. I would have been enough, but they weren't relying on me. So now they have made themselves an enemy of God, an enemy of God. Of God. Now, I'm speaking from God's perspective here. Um, Number 5 uh, says, why in verses 9 and 10 do they say we must not mention the name of the Lord? So he's really saying there's going to be 10 in the house and they're all going to die and their family's going to come and take the bodies to burn them. And somebody's hiding in the house. Is anybody here with you? No. Okay. We're not going to talk about this. We're not going to talk about what happened here. We're not going to mention the name of the Lord. A says, I don't know. That part doesn't make sense, which may be true for you. That's all right. B, because his name is not a magic word. See, they were throwing his name around like it was no big deal, like it was a magic word, like he was going to be protection. And now they are seeing the need to be a little more careful to mention him. Now they don't even want to mention him because he's bringing about wrath on their nation. They have made themselves his enemy and therefore do not want to hear about what he's doing. Don't talk about God anymore. God is not our friend right now. His name is finally revered and respected as it should be, but it shouldn't have to take this to make it that way. So, in other words, they were throwing it around flippantly. They're not doing that anymore. In fact, they're fearful. It's kind of what happened with the Ark of the Covenant in the early days of Israel. It was sort of a talisman to take into battle, and then it got captured because they weren't really calling on God. And then everywhere it went, people got sick, and it was like, yeah, let's not don't bring that to my town. And everybody was afraid of it. So all of a sudden his presence was respected, his name was respected. But man, did it have to take that for God to be respected and revered, for them to not take it lightly, not just assume he was on their side, but allow him to speak into their life, to critique their lives. Number 6 says, what about you? Are you complacent and prideful, thinking you are fine and don't need to grow, and trusting in God's name as if it were a magic word instead of seeking his will? And honestly, my analysis of the Church of Jesus Christ, what's supposed to be the Church of Jesus Christ today, is that we have more of this than we have authentic relationship with God. We have more people that are complacent, yet continue to gather to worship, supposedly, and use the name of the Lord as if it was a magic word, um, and don't really revere. Sometimes they use it as a curse word, which is a whole other discussion, but I'm not sure using it, we call it in vain, as a curse word is any better or worse than using it in vain in worship, taking it lightly, thinking it's just some magic potion or bibbity bobbity boo or open sesame. Um, the name of Jesus. No, it's not about the magic word. It's about revering the person of God, what he can do, what he wants to do in me, what he wants to change in me, who he wants to make me. Am I listening to him? Am I in relationship so that I can hear his voice and recognize his voice? This is what's important. And this is what's been lost, I think, in modern Christianity. And we need to get it